Stop walking 10,000 steps. Yes, you heard that right. The number you've been told to chase every single day, the one you thought was protecting your heart, your legs, your independence, may actually be holding you back. Because here's the truth most people never hear. After 60, more walking is not always better. In fact, it can quietly reinforce weakness, worsen joint strain, and leave critical muscles undertrained. And while you're busy counting steps, your balance is declining, your circulation is slowing, and your risk of falling is increasing. That's the part no one tells you. What your body actually needs now is not more steps. It's smarter movement, focused movement, movement that wakes up the exact muscles responsible for keeping you strong, stable, and independent. There is a simple 5-minute movement, one that most people overlook, that can do more for your legs, your blood flow, and your long-term mobility than an hour of walking ever could. This is not about doing more. This is about doing what works. And once you understand this, you will never look at exercise the same way again. Most individuals over the age of 60 continue to place a disproportionate level of trust in walking as their primary form of physical activity, believing that accumulating steps throughout the day is sufficient to maintain cardiovascular health, muscular strength, and overall independence. This belief has become deeply ingrained through years of public messaging that emphasizes step counts as a universal benchmark of fitness. However, this approach overlooks a critical physiological reality of aging. The human body does not respond to activity volume in the same way after 60 as it does in younger years. Instead, it responds more effectively to targeted, purposeful movement that activates specific muscle groups responsible for stability, circulation, and functional strength. Walking, while beneficial in moderation, primarily engages repetitive, lower-intensity motion patterns. These patterns are largely linear and predictable, meaning they do not challenge the neuromuscular system in a way that stimulates full-body adaptation. As a result, many older adults who walk regularly still experience progressive weakness in key stabilizing muscles, such as the glutes, deep core muscles, and supporting musculature around the ankles and hips. These are the very structures that determine balance, posture control, and fall resistance. When they are not adequately engaged through varied and intentional movement, the body gradually loses its ability to react efficiently to sudden changes in terrain, direction, or load. Another overlooked issue is the misconception that more walking automatically equates to better circulation. While walking does promote blood flow, it does so in a limited and repetitive manner. It does not sufficiently challenge the vascular system in a way that encourages the development of stronger microcirculation or improved muscular pump efficiency. Over time, this can contribute to persistent issues such as cold extremities, leg heaviness, and delayed recovery after activity. In contrast, controlled activation exercises that involve muscle contraction, release, and directional variation stimulate a far more robust circulatory response, enhancing oxygen delivery and nutrient transport to tissues that commonly weaken with age. There is also a structural concern that often goes unnoticed. As people age, joint resilience naturally declines due to changes in cartilage density, synovial fluid production, and connective tissue elasticity. Repetitive walking on flat surfaces does not address these changes. In some cases, it can reinforce compensatory movement patterns that place uneven stress on the knees, hips, and lower back. Without complementary strengthening and mobility work, these patterns gradually accumulate strain, leading to stiffness, discomfort, and reduced range of motion. Furthermore, reliance on step counts can create a false sense of security. Many older adults believe that achieving a daily target ensures adequate health protection, yet this metric fails to account for movement quality. 10,000 steps performed with poor posture, weak glute engagement, and limited core activation do not provide the same physiological benefit as fewer minutes of deliberate, controlled movement that activates the entire kinetic chain. The nervous system requires variation, resistance, and precision to maintain coordination and reflex integrity, none of which are guaranteed through walking alone. The deeper issue is not walking itself, but exclusivity. When walking becomes the sole form of activity, the body adapts narrowly, prioritizing endurance over strength, repetition over adaptability. This imbalance is what accelerates functional decline despite consistent activity. Muscles that are not challenged begin to atrophy even in active individuals, and this process is often mistaken for general aging rather than a correctable training gap. What the aging body truly requires is not reduction of movement, but refinement of it. It requires activation patterns that reintroduce strength into dormant muscle groups, restore joint alignment under load, and retrain balance responses under controlled stress. Without this, walking simply maintains a baseline rather than improving resilience. The difference between maintenance and improvement becomes critical in later years, where small declines in strength or stability can significantly impact independence and quality of life. Understanding this shift reframes the entire approach to senior fitness. It is no longer about accumulating movement for its own sake, but about selecting movement that directly counteracts the most common age-related losses. This includes muscle power, proprioception, and reactive stability, all of which decline faster when not intentionally trained through structured engagement rather than passive repetition. After the age of 60, the body undergoes a predictable but often underestimated shift in how it generates strength, maintains circulation, and coordinates movement under daily demands. One of the most important changes is the rapid decline in neuromuscular efficiency, which refers to the communication between the brain and the muscles. This decline does not always present as obvious weakness at first. Instead, it shows up as slower reaction time, reduced balance confidence, stiffness after rest, and a gradual loss of power during simple tasks such as rising from a chair or climbing stairs. The critical misunderstanding is assuming that general activity alone is enough to preserve this system. In reality, the nervous system requires intentional stimulation to remain responsive, and that stimulation cannot be achieved through repetitive, low-variation movement alone. A 5-minute targeted movement routine works precisely because it interrupts the pattern of passive decline. Instead of asking the body to simply endure prolonged activity, it forces brief but highly focused muscular engagement. This type of activation recruits deep, stabilizing muscles that are often neglected during walking or casual movement. These include the transverse abdominis, gluteus medius, and intrinsic foot stabilizers, all of which play a central role in maintaining upright posture and preventing instability during unexpected shifts in body weight. When these muscles are activated correctly, they create a structural support system that reduces reliance on joints alone, particularly the knees and lower back, which tend to absorb excessive stress in aging populations. Another essential factor is circulatory responsiveness. With age, blood vessels lose some of their elasticity, and the efficiency of oxygen delivery to peripheral tissues becomes less consistent. This is one of the primary reasons older adults experience sensations of heaviness in the legs, cold feet, or delayed recovery after physical exertion. Short-duration, high-focus movement patterns create a pumping effect within the musculature that significantly enhances venous return. This is not simply about increasing heart rate. It is about mechanically assisting the movement of blood through contraction and release cycles that activate both superficial and deep vascular networks. A brief but structured routine can stimulate this process more effectively than extended low-intensity walking, which often allows blood flow to plateau rather than dynamically respond. There is also a metabolic advantage that is frequently overlooked. Muscles act as one of the largest glucose reservoirs in the body, and when they are properly activated, they improve insulin sensitivity and energy regulation. The issue with relying exclusively on walking is that it does not consistently challenge fast-twitch muscle fibers, which are essential for maintaining metabolic flexibility. As these fibers become less active, the body becomes more prone to energy inefficiency, fatigue after minimal exertion, and slower recovery cycles. Targeted movement reintroduces controlled resistance to these fibers, even without external weights, by emphasizing balance shifts, controlled tension, and directional control. Equally important is the effect on joint integrity. Joints are not self-maintaining structures. They rely on surrounding muscle engagement to distribute load evenly and maintain alignment. Without varied activation, certain movement patterns become dominant while others weaken, creating imbalances that gradually alter posture and gait mechanics. A short, intentional routine forces the body to move through multiple planes of motion, which helps restore balanced joint loading and reduces the accumulation of repetitive stress in a single direction. This is particularly important for the hips and knees, which are highly sensitive to asymmetrical strain over time. Perhaps the most underestimated benefit is neurological stimulation. The aging brain responds strongly to novelty and movement. When movement becomes predictable, neural activation decreases, and coordination pathways become less efficient. Introducing brief, structured variation forces the brain to re-engage in motor planning, spatial awareness, and proprioceptive feedback. This is the foundation of balance and fall prevention, and it cannot be maintained through repetitive walking alone because the environment and movement pattern remain too consistent to challenge the system meaningfully. Over time, the accumulation of these small but critical deficits leads to a false interpretation of aging as inevitable decline, when in reality, much of what is perceived as decline is a result of understimulation rather than irreversible loss. At this stage of life, one of the most critical yet least understood principles of physical health is that strength is no longer maintained through effort alone, but through precision of activation. The body after 60 does not respond efficiently to random or generalized movement. It responds to targeted neurological input that reawakens dormant muscle pathways and restores coordination between stabilizers and prime movers. When this communication weakens, the consequences are not immediately dramatic, but they accumulate silently in the form of slower gait, reduced confidence on uneven ground, hesitation during movement transitions, and an increased reliance on external support for tasks that were once automatic. A 5-minute structured movement approach works because it directly addresses this breakdown in coordination. It does not attempt to overwhelm the body with duration or intensity. Instead, it focuses on re-establishing control. Control is the foundation of all functional movement. Without it, strength becomes less usable, balance becomes unpredictable, and endurance loses its practical value. The goal is not simply to move, but to restore the body's ability to direct movement with accuracy and stability. One of the most important elements in this process is proprioceptive reactivation. Proprioception is the body's internal awareness system, responsible for understanding where the limbs are in space without visual input. With aging, this system naturally becomes less sensitive, leading to delayed corrective responses during imbalance. This is one of the primary reasons falls become more common even in individuals who remain physically active. A short, focused routine that incorporates controlled shifts in weight, slow directional changes, and deliberate muscle engagement helps retrain this sensory system, sharpening the body's ability to detect and correct instability before it becomes a loss of balance. Another critical factor is muscular synchronization. In younger years, the body automatically recruits multiple muscle groups in harmony during movement. However, with age and inactivity patterns, certain muscles begin to dominate while others weaken. This creates compensatory movement strategies that appear functional on the surface, but are structurally inefficient. For example, over-reliance on the quadriceps during standing or walking can place excessive strain on the knees, while underactive glutes fail to stabilize the pelvis. A brief intentional movement sequence forces re-engagement of these underused muscles, restoring balance across the kinetic chain and reducing localized joint stress. Circulatory dynamics also shift significantly in later years, and this must be addressed through movement that encourages both compression and release within muscle tissue. Unlike passive activity, which maintains a steady but limited blood flow, structured activation creates rhythmic pressure changes that assist venous return and improve oxygen distribution to peripheral regions. This has a direct impact on reducing fatigue, improving lower limb comfort, and enhancing overall energy availability throughout the day. The key is not sustained intensity, but repeated activation cycles that stimulate vascular responsiveness without overloading the system. There is also a structural component that becomes increasingly important with age: joint alignment under load. Every movement performed in daily life places mechanical stress on joints, and if surrounding musculature is not properly engaged, that stress becomes unevenly distributed. Over time, this leads to wear patterns that reduce mobility and increase stiffness. A short, controlled routine emphasizes alignment awareness, ensuring that movements are executed through stable positioning rather than compensation. This reduces unnecessary joint compression and helps preserve range of motion in critical areas such as the hips, knees, and lower spine. Equally important is the restoration of reactive strength. This is the body's ability to respond quickly and effectively to unexpected changes in position or surface. It is not the same as static strength or endurance. It is a dynamic quality that depends heavily on neural responsiveness and fast muscle recruitment. When this system weakens, even minor disturbances such as a slight trip or uneven step can lead to disproportionate instability. Targeted movement patterns that include controlled pauses, directional shifts, and balanced transitions help retrain this responsiveness, gradually improving the body's ability to adapt in real time without hesitation or delay. Over time, these small but deliberate interventions begin to rebuild what aging tends to erode: not just muscle strength, but functional intelligence within the body itself. The ability to move safely, efficiently, and confidently depends less on how much activity is performed and more on how precisely that activity is structured to engage the systems responsible for stability and control. And once those systems begin to reawaken through consistent activation, the baseline of movement capability starts to shift in a noticeable way that continues to evolve with repetition. At this stage of life, one of the most overlooked realities in physical health is that decline rarely begins with pain or illness. It begins with subtle inefficiency in movement. After 60, the body does not abruptly lose function. It gradually loses coordination, timing, and muscular communication. These small breakdowns are often misinterpreted as normal aging, when in fact they are frequently the result of understimulated movement systems that are no longer being challenged in a meaningful way. This is why relying solely on general activity, especially repetitive, low-intensity walking, is insufficient to preserve full functional independence over time. The key issue is not inactivity, but incomplete activation. Many older adults remain active in the traditional sense, yet still experience stiffness, reduced balance confidence, and declining lower body strength. This contradiction exists because movement without specificity does not guarantee engagement of the deeper stabilizing structures that govern posture and control. The human body operates as an integrated system, and when certain components are consistently underused, compensatory patterns develop. These compensations allow basic function to continue, but they come at the cost of efficiency, alignment, and long-term resilience. A structured 5-minute movement protocol becomes powerful precisely because it eliminates redundancy and forces direct activation of neglected systems. Instead of allowing the body to default to familiar patterns, it introduces controlled demands that require conscious muscular recruitment. This type of engagement is particularly important for stabilizing muscles that are not easily activated through walking alone. These include deep hip stabilizers, spinal support muscles, and intrinsic lower leg musculature that governs balance reactions. When these systems are re-engaged, the body regains a level of structural integrity that directly translates into safer and more confident movement in daily life. Another critical factor is postural recalibration. With age, prolonged sitting, reduced variation in movement, and repetitive loading patterns gradually alter natural alignment. This often results in forward-leaning posture, reduced hip extension, and increased pressure on the lumbar spine. These changes do not simply affect appearance, they directly influence how force is distributed throughout the body. Poor alignment forces joints to absorb stress that muscles should normally manage. Over time, this leads to discomfort, reduced mobility, and increased vulnerability to injury. Short intentional movement sequences help reset these alignment patterns by guiding the body through controlled positions that reintroduce proper mechanical relationships between joints and muscles. There is also a neurological dimension that becomes increasingly important with age. The nervous system thrives on variation and precision. When movement becomes repetitive and predictable, neural activation decreases, and the speed of motor response begins to slow. This reduction in responsiveness is one of the hidden contributors to instability and delayed reaction during imbalance. A brief but focused movement routine introduces controlled variability that forces the brain to re-engage in real-time motor planning. This improves not only coordination, but also confidence in movement, which is a critical but often ignored component of physical stability. Circulation further illustrates why duration alone is not an effective measure of benefit. Extended low-intensity activity can maintain blood flow, but it does not necessarily optimize vascular responsiveness. In contrast, short bursts of targeted muscular engagement create alternating pressure within the tissues, assisting both arterial inflow and venous return. This mechanism is especially important in the lower limbs, where reduced circulation commonly leads to heaviness, swelling, or fatigue. By activating multiple muscle groups in sequence, the body effectively supports its own circulatory system in a way that passive activity cannot replicate. Joint health is another area where precision outweighs volume. Joints are dependent on surrounding muscular support to remain stable under load. When that support weakens, even routine movements begin to place uneven stress on cartilage and connective tissue. A structured movement approach ensures that force distribution remains balanced by actively engaging supporting musculature before load is applied. This reduces cumulative stress and helps preserve long-term joint integrity, particularly in weight-bearing areas such as the knees, hips, and ankles. Ultimately, the most important realization is that maintaining physical independence is not about doing more, but about doing what directly restores the systems most vulnerable to age-related decline. When movement becomes intentional rather than habitual, the body responds not with exhaustion, but with restoration, and that shift determines how well function is preserved over time. At this point in life, the most dangerous misconception is the belief that staying active automatically means staying strong. After 60, activity alone is no longer a reliable indicator of physical resilience. The body may still be in motion, but underneath that motion, critical systems responsible for balance, stability, and force generation can continue to weaken if they are not specifically challenged. This is why many individuals who consider themselves active still experience falls, stiffness, reduced stamina, or difficulty recovering after routine exertion. The issue is not lack of movement, but lack of targeted neurological and muscular engagement that preserves true functional capacity. A 5-minute structured movement approach is not about replacing activity, but about correcting what general activity fails to maintain. The human body is designed to adapt, and it adapts to the demands placed on it most consistently. When those demands are limited to repetitive, low-variation patterns such as casual walking or prolonged standing, the adaptation becomes narrow. Certain muscles become overused while others progressively weaken. This imbalance does not announce itself immediately. It develops slowly through subtle changes in posture, gait efficiency, and coordination timing. Over time, these small inefficiencies accumulate into noticeable limitations in mobility and confidence. One of the most critical systems affected by this imbalance is the body's stabilizing network. These are not the muscles typically associated with strength in common understanding. They are deeper structures responsible for maintaining alignment under shifting load. When these stabilizers are underactive, the body compensates by relying on larger superficial muscles that are not designed for sustained postural control. This compensation creates strain patterns that gradually affect joints, especially in the lower back, hips, and knees. A short, intentional movement sequence directly addresses this issue by forcing these stabilizers to re-engage in controlled, low-risk conditions, restoring their ability to support movement efficiently. Equally important is the restoration of reactive control. Everyday life is not performed in controlled environments. Small disturbances, uneven ground, sudden turns, minor slips require the body to respond instantly. This response is governed by neuromuscular reflex pathways that weaken when not regularly stimulated. As these pathways slow, the margin for error in movement becomes smaller, increasing vulnerability even during simple tasks. A focused movement routine reintroduces controlled instability, encouraging the nervous system to rebuild rapid correction ability. This is not about intensity, it is about precision and timing. Circulatory efficiency also plays a central role in functional aging. Blood flow is not only dependent on heart function, but also on muscular contraction cycles that assist in venous return. When movement is repetitive and low variation, this assistive mechanism becomes less effective. As a result, circulation in the lower extremities can slow, leading to sensations of heaviness, reduced endurance, and delayed recovery after activity. A short sequence of varied muscle engagement restores this pump-like function, improving oxygen delivery and metabolic exchange without requiring prolonged exertion. Another critical factor is movement economy. Over time, the body naturally seeks efficiency, often at the cost of completeness. It begins to favor the easiest available movement patterns, even if those patterns are mechanically suboptimal. This leads to reduced range of motion in certain joints and overdependence on limited movement pathways. Without correction, this narrowing of movement options becomes self-reinforcing. A structured 5-minute routine interrupts this cycle by reintroducing controlled variability, encouraging the body to rediscover full movement potential across multiple planes of motion. The nervous system also undergoes a form of desensitization when movement lacks variation. Neural pathways responsible for coordination, balance, and spatial awareness become less responsive when not challenged with new or precise demands. This reduction in responsiveness does not immediately appear as dysfunction. Instead, it manifests as hesitation, reduced confidence in movement, and slower corrective responses. Targeted activation reverses this trend by requiring the brain to continuously adjust and refine motor output, strengthening the connection between intention and execution. Ultimately, the most important shift in understanding is recognizing that maintaining independence is not achieved through accumulation of movement, but through quality of activation. The body does not require more time in motion. It requires more meaningful engagement of the systems that determine how that motion is controlled, supported, and stabilized. When these systems are consistently reactivated, even briefly, the foundation of physical capability becomes significantly more resilient, and the trajectory of decline can be meaningfully altered.